Have you ever thought about introducing a little science into your self-love time? Many of us experiment with masturbation, but fewer of us do masturbation experiments. Self-directed research studies on our solo sex lives, complete with spreadsheets full of stats. It's more fun than it sounds, trust me. My first foray into this nerdery was a masturbation month challenge I issued myself in 2015 called #DidYouJerkOffToday, where I would have solo sex every day for a month and post about the toys I'd used. Later, I also kept a meticulous spreadsheet called the Orgasm Registry, in which I noted the details of every single orgasm I had for a whole year, alone or with a partner. I definitely got a few weird looks from dates when I'd whip out my phone after sex to type up what had just happened, but I had good reasons for collecting this data. I wanted to learn more about my own sexuality, observe the patterns that kept popping up in my sex life, and brainstorm solutions to any problems that the data pointed out. Like that I tended to struggle to reach orgasm when stressed, or that certain partners or situations were likelier to give me anxiety than pleasure. The phrase sexual health often refers to stuff like STI status or contraception, but as I learned in my experiments, it's so much broader than that. It can tie into your mental health, relational health, and overall well-being. That's why today I want to look more closely at how the magic wand can be used therapeutically for everything from depression to chronic pain to rediscovering one's sexuality after a traumatic event. I'm Kate Sloan, and this is Making Magic: How the Magic Wand Became the World's Most Famous Vibrator.
My name is Danielle Bezalel, and I am the creator, executive producer, and host of the Sex Ed with DB podcast. And I have a Master's of Public Health from Columbia University with a certificate in sexuality and reproductive health.
Like me, Danielle is no stranger to nerdy masturbation experiments. She did one recently about the magic wand. As you can probably tell from her list of qualifications, her study was quite a bit more thought out and methodical than mine have been.
I feel like even in public health school, it is becoming more and more popularized and common to talk about female pleasure and to talk about people with vulvas who are gaining pleasure with masturbation, but it still is definitely not as common as talking about men and people with penises. Not only do we pay more attention to men talking about masturbation, but in our pop culture, there have been 3 separate instances of cis men fucking food, let alone just talking about vanilla, no food, no pun intended, masturbation, just normal masturbation without food. And so I think because of how normalized that is, I wanted to feel empowered in creating my own magic wand masturbation experiment that was really detailed and really intentional. And so I went to Magic Wand and said, what if I conducted this really detailed masturbation experiment? And yeah, the masturbation experiment was born.
When I've done my own amateur research on trends in my solo sex life, mostly it's just involved tracking whatever struck my fancy and then trying to pull useful findings from the results afterward. But Danielle went into her study with a specific question she wanted answered.
The research question is this. It is, what is the impact of daily magic wand use on my health and wellness, as well as my sexual experience when compared to regular sexual activity and no sexual activity? The experiment was really broken up into 3 different weeks. The first week was abstinence week, so no sexual activity whatsoever by myself or with my partner. The second week was treatment week, which was magic wand use every day of that week with or without my partner. And then the third week was regular week, so regular sexual activity with and without my magic wand. And so every day during the experiment, I had this really detailed, amazing Google sheet. All of the data babes would go crazy for it. I recorded measures on 27 different variables, including stress, anxiety, productivity, mood, horniness, orgasm experience, and a lot more. And then at the end of the 3 weeks, my team and I analyzed the results by noting changes in each variable.
Danielle picked the magic wand for this experiment for a few reasons. It's her absolute favorite vibe, the company was willing to sponsor the study, and the wand itself is extremely consistent, which is important when you're trying to study the effects of anything.
I knew 2 things. One, that it worked every time, and that it worked really quickly. to me, as someone who can sometimes be an impatient person, I would imagine that if I took a lot longer to reach orgasm, I don't think I would have enjoyed the experience as much. But I think I really was wanting to make sure that I reached orgasm quickly and that it wasn't something that I would have the potential to get frustrated over.
Danielle shared with me her 4 key takeaways from the results of the study.
Number 1, when using the magic wand every day, I experienced less stress, anxiety, and physical tension.
This makes sense. We know that sexual pleasure and orgasm release dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, which can help ease our stress, both in the short term and in the long term.
Number 2, I reported more frequent positive moods when using the magic wand every day, including higher levels of confidence.
I think the aforementioned stress relief probably plays a role here too, since the happier and more relaxed you are, the easier it is to feel sure of yourself.
Number 3, my orgasms came faster, no surprise there, and were more enjoyable when I used the magic wand every day.
Yep, sounds about right.
And number 4, my level of horniness increased over time when using the magic wand every day. And that 4th one is really interesting because the hypothesis that I had made around my horniness was that because I was kind of force feeding an orgasm or pleasure every day for that week, I assumed that my horniness would drop and I would be less into it if I kind of had this idea that I was making myself do something I didn't want to do. But the data show otherwise, that I actually was more into it as pleasure begets pleasure in that sort of way.
This sounded really familiar to me from my Did You Jerk Off Today experiment. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely days during that month when I felt grumpy or lazy and didn't want to masturbate, but the more that I pushed myself to do it daily, the more I found myself wanting to do it. Sometimes I would even get myself off twice in one day, just because I felt like it.
It's similar to me what I find for exercising. For me, exercise was always this thing where I was like, I'm not really in the mood, but I'm just going to kind of make myself do it. And then if I did it, I would feel so much better afterwards. And then the next day or the next, after 2 days, I would really crave it because I would really be in the mood for those endorphins. I would really want to move my body and sweat. And it would be really great for me for lowering my anxiety and my stress. And so this experience really mimicked that for me.
Danielle was already a diehard Magic Wand fan before running this study, so I wondered whether the experiment had led to any changes in her life or her perspective.
I would definitely say that my outlook on the importance of pleasure has severely changed, despite me literally being a sex educator and theoretically knowing all of these things. The proof is in the pudding. I really was a happier, less tension-filled, less stressed version of myself during that treatment week. And that really did have residual effects the following week. So I genuinely found I cracked this code to my happiness, and the pieces that make up my happiness puzzle are really great sleep, regular exercise, low stress, and sexual pleasure. I do feel like the magic wand really connected me to my body and my pleasure, unlike any toy ever has. And I'm very grateful that I discovered it. It's a fantastic fucking product.
That idea Danielle mentioned of pleasure begets pleasure has been a guiding principle for me in hard times. Even when I'm sick or heartbroken or deeply depressed, there's still chocolate and video games and comedy shows and, vibrators. And the more pleasure I allow myself, the more my mood tends to lift, creating space for me to pursue more things that feel good. It becomes a positive feedback loop of pleasure. I'm not the only one who likes to treat a heavy heart with a hefty dose of hedonism. In fact, wand vibrators are a frequent recommendation given for people suffering from depression by my friend, the author and educator Joellen Noddy.
I like to say I am a writer and a speaker and a person with just so very many feelings. I started off as a sex writer, and I have a long history of depression, and those two things interacted a lot, and so now I write about depression a lot. I started a sex blog when I was in the middle of getting divorced. when you start writing about sex, you notice there are things that pop up over and over again, and the magic wand is one of them. I actually had my divorce hearing, and so I was in Boston, and I went to court, and my ex's family lived in Boston, and mine did not. So I was all alone at this hearing, and he was there with his family, and it was all very awkward and sad and weird. And so I walked out of court and I got on the train in Boston, and I took the train to Coolidge Corner and got off and walked directly into Good Vibrations and bought my first magic wand. And that was how the magic wand came into my life. Honestly, it was incredibly empowering. I feel like society, especially this was over a decade ago, tells women specifically a lot of not true things about the owning of sex toys and vibrators and what it means about your status as a sexual person. Like, it's sad and it means you don't have a man and you know, whatever. And it felt so like the opposite of that. It felt so much like, I don't know, this huge step in embarking on this like fun, happy, sexually satisfied portion of my life.
That feeling of happiness and empowerment can be really hard to come by when you're depressed. But the good news is, Joellen's first book is a wonderful resource for anyone whose depression has ever gotten in the way of their sex life. It's called The Monster Under the Bed: Sex, Depression, and the Conversations We Aren't Having. It's based on a mix of Joellen's own experiences living with clinical depression and surveys and interviews she conducted with over 1,200 respondents. One thing that gets a lot of attention in the book is orgasm, because it can be a fraught topic for many depressed people, either because the depression itself makes it challenging, or because the medications taken for the depression make it challenging, or sometimes both. Joellen had to go on her own journey of self-discovery with regards to orgasms.
I had had for years the Good Vibrations Guide to Sex. And in that book, there's a quote where they talked to someone who said that she hadn't realized she was having orgasms because the description of orgasms is always like giant, like sonic boom and all the screaming and all of the like feelings all over the place. And it's enormous and it's huge. And you know, I'm somebody who's been on antidepressants since the dawn of time. So I was never having that experience, but I was having this sensation that I always thought, well, if I could get past that sensation, I will get to whatever an orgasm is. And I bought my magic wand, and I was having that sensation a lot and over again. And that sensation was fun and good. And I was like, but what's on the other side of that? And I started realizing that no, that what I was having, that is the orgasm. It's just that I've built it up to expect it to have this theatricality to it that it's not going to have. And adding to that the side effects that come with medications, it's also just a different thing. Having my magic wand actually helped me kind of figure out what orgasms actually looked like for me. And it was interesting and exciting and slightly disappointing because I was still waiting for that big, like, monumental explosion thing that everybody tells you will come one day. But also it was kind of a relief because for so long I thought, like, okay, well, I'm broken. There's this thing that I'm not having that the rest of the world is having. And once I kind of leaned into the thing I was having, I was like, oh, there it is. Okay.
The main reason wands work well for many people with depression is simply that they're strong. That intense stimulation can be exactly what many people need to help them get over hurdles that often come with depression and its treatments, like genital numbness, delayed orgasm, or orgasm feeling nearly impossible to achieve. The first depression medication I ever tried gave me all three of those issues, and it was an incredibly strange experience. Touching my genitals suddenly felt about as pleasurable as touching my elbow. I was much more prone to distraction while trying to masturbate because it just didn't feel good enough to hold my attention. I knew something was really wrong when I had a giggly threesome with two cute friends of mine and didn't get anywhere close to coming, despite the sexual skill and patience of all involved. The next day, I tried again, but alone this time. I pulled out all my most intense toys, including the magic wand, thinking, if anything will do it, it's gotta be this, right? And I still couldn't come. So I called my doctor and asked to be taken off the medication. Joellen told me about a time when she similarly used the magic wand as a benchmark for how much her meds were affecting her.
we were hooking up and I realized I couldn't orgasm. And so we got out my wand, and my joke about it was that, like, I could not come by hook or by crook, by hand or by Hitachi. Like, it just was not happening. And that became my litmus test, right? Like, if it couldn't happen with the magic wand, it was not happening.
Luckily for me, when I went off the meds I'd been trying, my sexual response pretty much reset to normal after a week or two. But a lot of people have to deal with these effects for much longer, either because their sex problems linger even after discontinuing medication, or because the medication works well for their depression, so they have to stay on it if they want to stay afloat mental health-wise. Some people's orgasms go MIA like mine did, while some still experience orgasms just differently.
There's not like a technical name for it. It's like weird orgasm, right? Like you're having an orgasm, but it's not your normal orgasm. It's some of the interviewees described it as like a dissatisfying orgasm, or like, I always remember one dude said it was like when you're driving a manual transmission car and it like doesn't quite land in gear. So you're like going along, but it's like not quite right. But there's also workarounds, and I always say that the magic wand is a huge workaround for some of those things.
Needless to say, these side effects suck. As Danielle discovered in her study, pleasure and orgasm can be hugely beneficial for our mental health. So it's disheartening that seeking help for your depression can sometimes mean losing access to pleasure and orgasm, or at least finding them more difficult to access. Joellen gives lots of advice on this in her book. One of the best things you can do about it, actually, on a societal level at least, is to tell your doctor about these side effects when you run into them.
I had a psychiatrist he was like your central casting 70-year-old white male from Boston psychiatrist. He suggested a medication and I said, well, it cannot impact my sex life. That is a no-go right there. And he pulled out this big book and he looked through it and he said, well, this book says it won't do that. It definitely did that. And I went in and I talked to him about it, and I was ready for this to be like a thing. I was ready for him to lecture me about how that wasn't important and whatever. What he did instead was he said, people don't tell us this stuff a lot. And how we get the information that ends up in the book that I looked this up in is we compile what patients tell us and we submit it, and then it ends up in the book. But people are embarrassed to tell us when it's sex stuff, so it doesn't end up in the book. So I tell you it doesn't happen, and you go home and you think it's not going to happen, and then it happens. So thank you for not being afraid to come in and tell me. And that was always like just a huge light bulb moment for me.
I totally get why so many people would be afraid to tell their doctors what's going on for them sexually, especially depressed people who often struggle with shame as is. You never really know what the reaction will be. I mean, hell, I once had a doctor slut-shame me because I requested birth control and a routine STI panel. But I was glad for the reminder from Joellen that in this case, doing the brave, hard thing can be helpful not only so you can get your own treatment plan adjusted, but so that other people in the future will hopefully not have to go through the same thing. Mental health isn't the only area of medicine where sexuality is often seen as low priority, sadly, as my friend Claire learned when they had a couple of strokes at the age of 28.
Hi, I'm Claire A.H. I am a burlesque teacher, dating coach, matchmaker, and a storyteller.
At the time that I met Claire, she was a superstar in my local sex-positive community in Toronto. I mainly got to know her through Tell Me Something Good, a sexy storytelling event, where I met a lot of the people I'm still friends with to this day. Claire was a big Magic Wand fan even then, and had been for years, ever since getting their first one.
So definitely in terms of my purchase, I remember that because I had a gift card to American Apparel and they had the magic wand there. And by that point, I knew what it was. I feel like I had known what it was for like quite a long time. And I went in and I was just like, I will take the magic wand behind the counter, please. And I felt very grown up that day. I think I was like probably 19. I liked it right away. I don't think there was any I didn't have any complicated feelings.
Claire is and was such a vivacious, active, energetic presence in our community that it was especially shocking to us all when they suffered some strokes the morning after doing a burlesque performance at a book launch party.
This was like mid-May 2015, and I was having just a really busy, wonderful time. I felt really good about my place in the world. The burlesque that I was doing was actually paying for like the rhinestones and the costumes, so I was kind of like making money. And I had some really interesting gigs coming up, including one that was like 3 days after my major stroke events. So very unfortunate, never got to do that gig. It's unclear exactly what caused it, but likely, stretching, yoga, or dance. There was a little tear in my vertebral artery, so minute that I don't think if I felt it, it didn't feel like a dangerous bad thing. And it didn't cause the actual stroke events until I don't know how much long after, but it certainly wasn't like an immediate thing. Retroactively, I realized that it wasn't just that I was really busy that week, but I actually wasn't making memories some of the time. And the night before the major stroke event, I had performed. And then I remember getting off stage and being like, I know I did it. Because the thing about burlesque is no matter how bad it is, as long as the clothing come off, technically you did it. And it was like, well, it must have been okay because there was applause and I'm not wearing most of the things anymore. But I couldn't really remember it. And so then I went home.
Things really started to go haywire around 6 a.m. the following day.
I went to the bathroom, and on the way back, just walking down our very long hall, all of a sudden it felt like a wacky shack, like really just kind of like getting shaken around. And that's not normal. I had the moment where I thought, okay, maybe I should contact my parents just to let them know what's happening. And by the time they got over, I was not able to like walk or stand, vomiting profusely, just like kind of very obviously having something going on. And so the ambulance came, and then I spent some time in the ICU, then some time in the hospital, then about a month and change in a rehabilitation inpatient facility. At first, I couldn't use my hands. I was basically pretty much entirely paralyzed. I could talk, but one of my vocal cords was paralyzed, or is still paralyzed, and was quite profoundly impacted. So I could be heard, and it was clear that like cognitively I was there. But one of the major, I guess, like the most relevant symptom here is that I lost and still don't have sensation on the left side of my body from the neck down, as well as the right side of my face, and then my right hand is kind of like 2/3 of the way numb. So it's very, very confusing.
I can't imagine how scary it would be to adjust to living in basically a whole different body and to not even know whether you're still going to be able to enjoy sex. That's the uncertainty Claire was feeling when they came home and had sex with their partner for the first time after the strokes.
I was concerned that it would be like, I can kind of feel something, but it doesn't, rise to the level of something that might make me have an orgasm. And my concern really was that like orgasms were a thing of the past for me. And I do remember us getting out the Hitachi and it working what I would say was like relatively quick. The Hitachi Magic Wand was kind of like the thing that worked. I was going to call it the silver bullet, but that is another thing. That's another sex toy. It's been 8 years, so just time elapses. We've identified a lot of things that work, and that is lovely. And frankly, the Hitachi is the only one that I would consider like an external source.
It was a huge relief for Claire, getting an answer to the question of whether the strokes would wreck their sex life. It would have been helpful if medical staff had offered to answer questions like that at any of the facilities Claire stayed in during recovery, but the subject of sex was literally never brought up.
I was in awe of how completely they ignored it, frankly. It's not the most important thing in life, but it's a very important thing for a lot of people, so it's weird that that didn't come up. They didn't even come at it from a childbearing angle, which I was surprised by because I was 28 at the time and in what they ostensibly probably thought was a cishet relationship. And no one brought that up at all, so even that wasn't discussed.
Claire has subsequently co-authored a paper in the American Journal of Occupational Therapy about their firsthand experiences with how doctors address sex, or more often don't address it, with their patients.
Often people are concerned about offending the patient. They're concerned about engaging in conversation that might be deemed inappropriate by the body overseeing them, the college of, physicians or occupational therapists. And then just not knowing where to start. They're not sex educators, especially not within the context of disability. So they just feel okay, if they do have questions, I don't have answers. Okay, we're usually dealing with people who are either disabled or old. And those are the categories that people do not think have sex. So it just became it's easy for it to be a non-issue because to make it an issue is complicated and necessitates a lot of information and conversations that people just don't feel prepared to have.
The desexualization of disabled folks and older folks is indeed a rampant problem. I remember taking a course in university about the psychology of aging, and when the professor launched into a lecture about senior citizens' sexuality, a bunch of the other students actually said, "Ew," And the professor said he agreed with them that it's gross to think about old people fucking. I was horrified to see a professor perpetuating ageism in such a cruel way, especially a professor who teaches about aging. When I spoke to Joan Price, an author and speaker whose work focuses on senior sex, she told me a similar story.
A man in his 40s or so was interviewing me and said, I get what you're saying, but ew, I just can't imagine my grandparents having sex. I mean, isn't that disgusting? And I said, at what age do you plan to retire your genitals? That had a good effect on him, and I've continued to use that line.
Of all the people I interviewed for this series, I think Joan has been using the magic wand for the longest, so she's a true expert. She bought her first one decades ago.
I was in the, quote, personal care, unquote, department in Macy's department store. And I was in my 30s. I'm 80 now, so it was a very long time ago. I named mine Buzzy, by the way. Yeah, I find it hilarious now that on the box it was marketed for everything except the reason we would be buying it. It was supposed to give us a rosy glow. Well, okay, yes, that it did, but the picture was of this woman's face, and she's holding the magic wand, and her cheeks are blushing. Are we supposed to put this on our face? I don't think so. Well, it didn't take me long to figure out where to put it, and I've been a fan of the magic wand ever since. I have owned every version of the magic wand, and you know what? They all work. When I was a young woman, it was too strong, but I would just put a washcloth between the magic wand and my vulva, and that way it softened it enough.
Joan told me that the physical effects of aging can make strong vibrators extra useful for many older folks.
We need intensity. We don't have the blood flow rushing to the genitals that we used to. We don't have the hormones that help propel our arousal and orgasm. We need extra help to access them.
While Joan loves the magic wand, she told me that it does have a couple of downsides for older users. Namely, that it's heavy and that the vibrations transmit somewhat into the handle, which can be painful for folks dealing with arthritis or similar.
Often I will prefer vibrators that are light, but we need the heavy-duty motor. And so there's got to be some trade-off here. The thing is that the magic wand works so fast that the heaviness isn't really a problem. It's a problem if it were taking me longer, but thanks to the intensity of it, it's fast.
Another benefit of wands is that their long handle makes them easier to maneuver for people who may struggle with flexibility or reach, including some people with bigger bodies. For more on this, I spoke with Elle Chase, a sex educator and relationship coach who wrote a book called Curvy Girl Sex: 101 Body-Positive Positions to Empower Your Sex Life. She's a big fan of the wand.
I had just sort of discovered my sexual self at 40, and I had discovered the rabbit, and then I had heard about the Hitachi. I went to the Pleasure Chest in West Hollywood, California, and asked about it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, no, this is the best. You know, you can't go wrong with the magic wand." And at the time, I was at the heaviest I had been, and I was kind of embarrassed about asking about reach and all of that kind of thing. But I saw, obviously, that it was a wand, and I thought, oh, this should be great. And then I brought it home, and I was like, I understand now. I think just being able to get off on the wand in that specific wand way, there should be a book called The Wand Way, was freeing, because in the moment that I had the orgasm with that wand, it opened my brain up to the idea of different kinds of orgasms and what was my body capable of and what was I going to allow my body to be capable of.
Elle's book details sex positions that can accommodate larger bodies. The tone of it is joyful and sexy, which feels refreshing in a world that so often depicts fatness as anything but.
I am not considered fat right now, but for half my life, I was a big girl. So my stomach would hang over my mons, the front of my genitalia. And I would be very self-conscious about it with a partner for a while. And I would always have to sort of pre-think using any sort of device with a partner. With the wand, I never had to worry because I was able to get creative with ways that I can use it. Like, for instance, I would sometimes just put my lower stomach on top of the wand, holding it in place. And my partner would get on top. He would help holding it in place while he was, fucking me. And so I had stimulation. I didn't have to hold something there. I didn't have to move my stomach around. It was actually being used for something, and so I wasn't like, oh God, my stomach is in the way. At the time, too, it was the only thing really going that one could use in different positions. I could be on my knees as a fat chick with a big ass and a lot of flesh, and my partner with a big stomach and a booty could use it and, do me from behind with the wand, reaching around. And it was great. It wasn't like we had to use a tiny little bullet.
Elle told me she uses the magic wand not just during sex and masturbation, but for other assorted purposes too. On blocked sinuses, neck pain, back pain. It can kind of do it all. I live with a chronic pain disorder, fibromyalgia, and I've also found the magic wand helpful for body aches. In fact, one of my core magic wand memories is the time I was in college and spent the day hunched over my laptop at my parents' kitchen table, working on my class assignment about the magic wand. By the time I finished my draft, it was almost midnight, and my whole body was throbbing with pain. But on the table right next to me was, you guessed it, my magic wand. So I picked it up and soothed away some of the aches so I could get some well-deserved sleep. While we're talking about pain, did you know that some people use the magic wand during childbirth? The sex-positive feminist author Susie Bright wrote an unforgettable essay called Egg Sex in 2006, in which she describes doing this. I wasn't able to speak to Susie for this series, but I did connect with Alice Lovegood, a sex educator and former student midwife, who told me this.
Essentially, when you give birth, the same hormones that got the baby in there gets the baby out. Primarily, oxytocin is responsible for your contractions and progressing labor, and endorphins are responsible for pain relief. They are like the nature's best pain relief.
So using a vibrator during labor is actually really smart because it promotes the release of these feel-good chemicals.
You're stimulating your nervous system so much that it can't physically give you as much pain. Anything that makes you feel calm, makes you feel safe, makes you feel loved will help labor. So I think that's really wonderful that she was able to use the magic wand to give her a positive birth experience.
Of course, if you're gonna masturbate while giving birth, doctors and nurses might raise an eyebrow about it. Or they might not. Doctors across several disciplines are starting to recommend vibrators to their patients. They don't just feel good and de-stress you, they're an evidence-based treatment for many sexual dysfunctions. Here's Dr. Debbie Herbenek, the professor and sexual health researcher.
We do know that for many people, if you're using vibration, you're going to enhance blood flow to the genitals, and for many people, that's going to feel really good. We do know that vibration, regardless of your genitals, whether you've got vulva and vagina or a penis and scrotum, can also result in a quicker orgasm or in an orgasm at all. For some people, that might find orgasm difficult otherwise. And then, of course, when people are experiencing this, they also can then get in touch more with their body and their sexuality. And so some people may also feel stronger desire even on days that they're not using vibrators or other sex toys.
Dr. Herbenek was careful to clarify that correlation does not equal causation. So even though her research has linked vibrator usage with better sexual health, that doesn't necessarily mean the vibrators are causing better sexual health. It's possible that people whose sensitivity, sexual satisfaction, and so on are already high are likelier to seek out vibrators. But Dr. Herbenek told me she thinks it's a little from column A and a little from column B. Despite their known benefits, though, many doctors still hesitate to recommend vibrators. This is just my own theory, but I wonder how much of it has to do with the common misconception that vibrators can desensitize you over time, or that you can become habituated or even addicted to them.
Well, I think there's a difference between habituation and addiction. If we think about like getting kind of used to a sensation, well, sure. I mean, people can get used to a sensation and they can get used to vibrators. And yeah, I mean, there are some people who might find it difficult to experience orgasm through their hand or through a partner's, mouth or a penis if they've been relying solely or mostly on a vibrator. But I think, all that said, we don't seem to have the same panic, about any other type of sex. And that's what's kind of interesting, right? Is nobody's like, oh, don't experience, don't like let yourself receive cunnilingus because then you're never going to be able to experience orgasm in other ways. And nobody says, oh, be careful about having like, an orgasm from intercourse because then you won't have it in other ways. So I think when people have that panic about vibrators, we should ask ourselves what that panic is really about.
Do we get addicted? Or only if we get addicted in quotes to pleasure. Oh, I'm having orgasms. I guess I'm an addict. I mean, then how much sense does that make? Don't use your penis. I'll get addicted to your penis.
It doesn't have to be a bad thing to find an effective way to stimulate yourself that you like. Many of us in sex education do give the advice, well, if you want to like expand the ways that your body responds, then go ahead and try different things, right? And that can be like vibrators sometimes, oral sex or intercourse other times, or it could be like lubricant sometimes, not lubricant others. So, I mean, I think there's always ways to mix it up. And many people do find that like regardless of their gender or genitals, that can keep them kind of responsive to a range of stimulations.
In my view, so many of these anti-vibrator narratives are really just anti-pleasure narratives. Vibrators are good for our health in many cases, sexually, mentally, and otherwise. And when we can set aside our culturally instilled baggage about pleasure being bad or something we need to feel guilty about, we can live much happier lives, in and out of the bedroom.
Pleasure is important to people, and vibrators have an important role to play in that, whether people are enjoying them alone or with a partner. Sex toys can just be like a fun, positive part of sexual exploration and learning what you like, enjoying what you like, and just kind of being playful.
So I say robbing yourself of pleasure because you're afraid you might, not be able to experience different pleasure, possibly. It doesn't check out to me. It doesn't add up. Life is short. Have the orgasms.
Thanks for geeking out about vibrator science with me this episode. We're getting close to the end of the series, and I've heard a lot of magic wand stories by now, but me and the Vibratex team want to hear yours too. Write us an email or send us an audio file at stories@magicwandoriginal.com with your funny, strange, or heartwarming magic wand anecdotes, and we might just feature them. In the next episode, we'll wrap things up. I'll tell you some of my takeaways from a year of eating, sleeping, and breathing all things magic wand. And I'll dig through my interviews to show you some of my favorite rants, raves, and stories that didn't quite fit anywhere else. Until then, keep on making magic. Making Magic is hosted and co-produced by me, Kate Sloan, edited and co-produced by Jamie Pittenger, and made possible by the generous support of Vibratex, with art by Addison Finch. Special thanks to my guests for this episode, Danielle Bezalel, Joellen Noddy, Claire A.H., Joan Price, Elle Chase, Alice Lovegood, and Dr. Debbie Herbenik. You can find links to their work in the show notes.